So, the Patrick John administration was from 1970 to 1979. And then again, he lost the election in 1980 to Dame Mary Eugenia Charles. Now, in speaking about Dame Mary Eugenia Charles, her administration led Dominica for 2 terms. Her first term was from 1980 to 1985, and her second term was from 1985 to about 1990 or 1995. Now, let's really talk about Dame Mary Eugenia Charles. And I must say that as a woman, it is very exciting for me to speak about Dominica's first and only female prime minister. Now, Dame Mary Eugenia Charles, the first Dominican woman to become a lawyer, as well as the first and only female prime minister that Dominica has had, came from a humble background from the fishing village of Point Michelle. Her father's success as a landowner propelled her into the conservative colored bourgeoisie. After studying in Toronto and London, she returned to Dominica and established a successful law chamber specializing in property law. In the 1960s, she entered politics to counter the ruling party's oppressive plans, eventually forming the Dominica Freedom Party. Charles faced personal attacks with dignity and used her legal training to challenge the government. Notably, she drew attention to the government's absurdities by attending Parliament in a bathing costume during debates in order to oppose a dress code act. She was elected to the House of Assembly in 1970 and served when Dominica gained independence from Britain in 1978. Eugenia was also a strong advocate for the freedom of press, countering the Shut Your Mouth bill, a bill that was made to silence criticism and outlaw the opposition. Although she would later be described as an ideologically conservative individual, right of the center politician who was unafraid to publicize her conservative views in an era when it was more fashionable or unprofitable to articulate a progressive political ideology. Now, when Dame Eugenia Charles came into power, the Honorable Patrick John was not pleased. When Charles won, Patrick John, with the assistance of members from the Ku Klux Klan and the Dominica Defense Force, created what is now called Operation Red Dog.
New Orleans television station WVUE shot footage of 10 people arrested in that city last week. All of them were heavily armed and apparently planned to leave this country soon on an invasion of the Dominican Republic. It is still not known who was behind the attempted coup. But federal agents say there was someone chosen to head the country's government if the invasion was successful. Along with the men arrested, agents seized a large quantity of arms, ammunition, and explosives. In looking at the footage of the men who were arrested, I tried to see if any of them matched with men I had seen in the Ku Klux Klan Special Forces training camp story that we did last year.
So what is Operation Red Dog? Well, Operation Red Dog was the cover name for a military filibustering plot that took place on April 27, 1981, involving Canadian and American citizens who were primarily connected to the KKK and white supremacist organizations. The plotters intended to overthrow Dominica's government, which would be the Charles administration, in order to reinstate former Prime Minister Patrick John. American white supremacist Don Black, German-Canadian neo-Nazi Wolfgang Dreoge, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, so I apologize if I pronounce that incorrectly, American Klansman Mike Perdue, and Barbadian weapon smuggler Sidney Burnett Allen were among the main figures in Operation Red Dog. The news media called the operation Bayou of Pigs, such a funny name, because U.S. federal officials in New Orleans, Louisiana, foiled it, alluding to the unsuccessful 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion that occurred. Aftermath of the coup, however, resulted in a riot because the coup was very unsuccessful. And so the aftermath of that resulted in a riot and killing in the 1981 carnival and a Dominica Defense Force assault on police headquarters that left one policeman dead and several others injured. However, a police sentry prevented the release of imprisoned Patrick John and Captain Malcolm Reed, potentially saving John's life from summary execution by local security forces. Later on, Eugenia Charles would pardon Mr. John, who would go on to lead the Dominica Football Association and build its headquarters. Now, before we fully dive into Eugenia Charles, I must mention that Hurricane David occurred in August of 1979. On August 29th, Dominica and its capital Roseau suffered a devastating blow from winds reaching 150 miles per hour. The island's economy, as a result, was greatly affected as the banana and citrus crops were wiped out. Sadly, 37 people lost their lives and 60,000 individuals were left homeless. This was the most severe storm to hit the island to date. And then we had Maria years later, but we'll get to that. And destruction from Hurricane David was valued at about EC $1.2 billion. So this is just to frame the economy into which Dame Eugenia Charles entered as Dominica's Prime Minister. During Charles's leadership, Dominica maintained social welfare policies while reducing corruption amongst the government and unions. The late Caribbean proponent was highly respected for her advocacy of unity and forthright manner. Her effective lobbying efforts resulted in aid for Dominica's economy, leading to improved living standards and what was described as the best roads in the English-speaking Caribbean. The island also experienced a decrease in violent crime after the seeming destruction of the dreads, but tourism remained low due to other factors. The Dominican Rastafari were still outsiders prosecuted by the government, but their relationship with the Charles administration improved gradually. And so, the island began to heal. Now, we are in 1983, and while Dominica healed, Eugenia Charles came to the forefront internationally as chair of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, standing next to President Ronald Reagan in the White House, calling for U.S. intervention in Grenada.
To present to you the chairman of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and the Prime Minister of Dominica, Prime Minister Charles.
I think we were all very horrified at the events which took place recently in Grenada. We, as part of the Organization of East Caribbean States, realizing that we are, of course, one region, we belong to each other, our kith and kin, we all have members of our state living in Grenada. We're very concerned that this event should take place again. It is true that we have managed to live with the regime since March 79, and we felt quite clearly, and we had good reason to believe, that the Bishop regime was seeing it our way and was on the way to have elections. And we think this is the reason why himself and his cabinet were destroyed.
This invasion of Grenada is something other regional ministers thought of as a violation of the Caribbean space. Honorable Dame Mary Eugenia Charles may have supported the American invasion of Grenada in 1983 in reaction to the coup d'etat that she experienced. Even though the United Nations General Assembly voted 108-9 in support of a resolution condemning the intervention by the US, her uncommon and even controversial stance did not lessen her popularity within Dominica, where she gained the cherished name Mamo Charles. Her nickname, Iron Lady of the Caribbean, came about as a result of her tenacity and unwavering attitude. Nonetheless, although Eugenia Charles is described as the Iron Lady and having helped Dominica's banana industry post-Hurricane David, as Patrick John before her, her administration had its weaknesses. During her second decade in office, from 1985 to about 1990 or 1995, the leader's popularity diminished due to her arrogance and lack of concern for grassroots opinions. She prioritized development projects aligned with U.S. structural adjustment programs, which favored infrastructure over social welfare and employment opportunities. Furthermore, during her time in power, the former leader failed to address the class divisions and color-based discrimination on the island. She governed, as some would say, like a strict headmistress of an old-fashioned girls' school, prioritizing good manners, hard work, and religion over innovation, progress, and community. So, while some admired her, the poor and intellectuals were not among her supporters. One of her dissenters, Rosie Douglas, who often opposed the Freedom Party though, through his op-ed writings about revolution, would then go on to become Dominica's Prime Minister in 2000.
Dominica, the island I was born, the thing is, my life will always be threatened there because of the barbaric kind of laws, the almost medieval laws which have been passed in Dominica.
In the 1990 elections, the Dominica Freedom Party narrowly won a majority over the Dominica United Workers' Party and the Labour Party of Dominica left-wing coalition formed in 1985. The Dominica Freedom Party retained power until about 1995, when Charles retired from public life.